It's a fake. I created it, and it's real. Don't you understand? It is real. I created it, and it's real. It's real. Oh, God.
Hello and welcome to Genshin Optimization, where we take a look at some of our favorite Genshin Impact characters and break down how they work and how to build them to maximize their usefulness on your teams. My name's Shimbius, and today we're taking a look at my original and probably still favorite main DPS character, the discount catgirl herself, Keqing. Let's get started. Keqing is an electro sword user who can deal massive electro or physical damage depending on which direction you decide to take her build in. She also has a lot of unique and rewarding mechanics and tech to push her DPS to the limit, though while she can't easily output quite the same tier of damage as Diluc or Tartaglia, I would argue that mastering her gameplay can potentially feel much more fun and rewarding. But don't take that comment the wrong way, Keqing's damage is not at all lacking. In fact, she has some of the best sword user normal and especially charge attack scalings in the entire game, especially when you take into account just how fast her attack speed is. Her charge attack is also very spammable and where a lot of your damage with her will likely come from. Her E skill though, Stellar Restoration, is where a lot of her mechanics lie. On activation, Keqing throws out a lightning stiletto that does a small amount of electro damage. You can hold the skill to directly choose exactly where to throw the ability as well. You can then either reactivate the skill to blink to the stiletto and slash in front of her for AoE electro damage. If you held the ability, you won't be blocked by terrain as well, otherwise objects and ledges can stop your blink. Additionally, her Ascension 2 talent grants her weapon a 5-second electro infusion when you recast the ability this way. Alternatively, you can charged attack while the stiletto is out to have it explode in a small AoE for electro damage without actually infusing your sword. Her ult, Starward Sword, deals solid electro damage multiple times and a large AoE around her that ends with a much stronger hit. With a 12-second cooldown and 40 energy cost, this is a super spammable ult as well. Additionally, she gains a 15% crit rate and energy recharge bonus for 8 seconds after using her ult, which is a massive buff, and along with her up to 88.4% crit damage ascension stat bonus is what makes her the queen of crits. As far as building Keqing, she's actually fairly easy to build. You want to reach the 60 to 70% crit rate sweet spot and then stack attack and crit damage. This is consistent with both of her main build paths, one focusing on electro damage and the other on physical damage. We'll be discussing both paths, but keep in mind that my main experience and personal bias is towards the electro build, but don't let me dissuade you from building her for physical damage if that's what you're more interested in. Crit-oriented weapons are fantastic on her, but if you have the 5-star Aquila Favonia, the passive and high base attack are fantastic, and the physical damage substat makes it the best in slot for her physical damage focused build. But most people aren't likely to have this weapon. As such, let's take a look at her best free-to-play and budget-friendly weapons. Her best in slot for both builds is a hotly debated topic, but I would definitely argue heavily in favor of the Black Sword Battle Pass weapon for both builds. On top of being fairly free-to-play friendly, it has solid base attack scaling and crit rate as the substat. Additionally, the passive grants a notable bonus to normal and charge attack damage and gives a small bit of sustain on your crit hits every 5 seconds. Running this weapon alongside a few crit substat artifacts allows you to stack for attack and crit damage to maximize your artifact bonuses. If you're willing to spend the Masterless Starglitter, Blackcliff Longsword is another hotly debated contender for one of her best weapons, granting higher base attack and crit damage as the substat. The passive attack bonus stacking is also okay, but inconsistent. Otherwise, Lion's Roar is a solid electro build weapon for the attack percent substat and the damage bonus against enemies affected by electro. Prototype Rancor is also very free-to-play friendly and gives high base attack alongside a physical damage substat if you want to go down that build path, and the final option is the Flute, which scales well with its base attack and attack percent substat and provides a bit of AoE every 5 normal and charge attacks with its passive. As for artifact choice, this is one of the main differences between the electro and physical builds. Both builds will benefit greatly from the 2-piece Gladiator set's 18% attack buff. This is consistently solid as a 2-piece set for main DPS characters. Don't go for the 4-piece of the set, however. Its buff is only for normal attacks and you will want to be spamming charge attacks more than your normal attacks, so Keqing doesn't actually benefit from this set as much. As for the electro build, I would suggest capping off with a 2-piece of the Thundering Fury set for the 15% electro damage bonus, as most of your damage will be electro based. Going for the full 4-piece Thundering Fury set is also a decent option for your electro build, but only if you're focusing heavily on proccing a lot of electro-based reactions, such as if you plan on running Xingqiu with her. I've also seen some people discussing running a 2-piece Noblesse Oblige with a 2-piece Thundering Fury to maximize your ult damage, but that's mostly with more supportive Keqing builds, so I wouldn't actually suggest it. As for physical builds, I would suggest pairing your 2-piece Glad set with a 2-piece Bloodstained Chivalry for the 25% physical damage bonus. Since Keqing is so charge attack focused, going for the 4-piece of Bloodstained isn't actually a bad idea as well, as it grants a massive 50% damage bonus to your charge attacks and makes them cost no stamina for 10 whole seconds after defeating an enemy. Of course, that means this 4-piece is useless in boss fights, but it's super strong in much of the Abyss, most domains, and in the open world. For your artifact main stats, you should go for a standard main DPS spread with attack percent on the timepiece, electro or physical damage on your cup depending on your build, and crit on your circlet. The cup is the only notable variance for artifact stats between builds, so everything in this section applies the same to both the physical and electro build paths. Remember that Keqing gets a 15% crit rate bonus from her Ascension 4 passive talent when she ults, which will stay active for a good portion of the time that she'll be on the field for. So you actually only need to hit 50 to 60% crit rate to reach that sweet spot with that bonus. If you need a crit rate circlet to hit that, that's the stat that you should go for, otherwise stacking more crit damage will only make her hit harder. Attack percent is also an okay filler stat, but most of her damage really comes from her insane crits. As for substats, of course you want crit rate to hit 50 to 60% before accounting for her ult bonus, then just stack your crit damage to the moon and back. The higher your crit damage, the more valuable your other stats retroactively become. After this, attack percent is naturally very good to have on her to further buff her offensive capabilities. Finally, either Elemental Mastery or Energy Recharge are good stats to cap off your artifacts with. Elemental Mastery isn't as big on physical builds, but you'll still likely proc some elemental reactions with your ult, so it's not a waste. You also want some, but not much, energy recharge. You get 15% when you ult from your Ascension 4 passive talent, so an additional 15 to 25% is more than enough to ult on cooldown for an electro build. Physical builds might want slightly more just because you won't be generating quite as many electro particles, and you'll still want to be able to ult on cooldown for the 15% crit bonus. Alright, let's finish up this feline faker by discussing my favorite aspect about her mechanics. You won't actually be using a lot of this on the physical build, as you don't want to recast her E-skill and infuse your weapon with electro, which you will do a lot with her tech since it usually involves particular usage of her lightning stilettos. In both builds, you will mostly be spamming charge attacks with her, as this is her best scaling option and comes out extremely quickly. As well, be sure to ult whenever it's up to gain the crit and energy recharge bonuses from her Ascension 4 passive talent. One of the main mechanics regarding her ult that you should be taking advantage of no matter your build path is the fact that you can act before the ult actually ends. During the last couple small slashes before the final hit, you actually regain control and can act with her again. If you learn the timing, you can hit a charge attack or two in the time it takes for your ult to end with that last big hit. But electro builds can actually make really great use of this to stack the uptime on your electro infused weapon. I first personally discovered and began using the mechanic about a month into playing her myself, and it's very simple and easy to do. First, before you ult, either press or hold your E to throw out a lightning stiletto into position. Then use your ult and wait until you regain control of Keqing again to reactivate your lightning stiletto. Unlike with the charge attack, you can spam the button to reactivate it as soon as you regain control, then play normally until your lightning infusion runs out, which should be at the exact same time as your E skill comes back up, which will allow you to reactivate it and have an uninterrupted 10-second uptime on your electro infused attacks. The reason this works is because the cooldown of the skill actually starts when you throw out the lightning stiletto, not when you reactivate it. And by simply learning the input order and getting faster at it, you can maximize the in-lag reduction of each of these animation cancels on cast. The other main mechanic with her E skill is that you can hold the skill to place the stiletto exactly where you want it, so that you can reactivate it and plunging attack for good AoE damage. This works especially well when paired with Sucrose and especially Venti ults. Just keep in mind that when doing this, you should place your E high enough to plunge with it and focus on getting faster at that through practice. When holding, don't place the stiletto too low, as the game will always set you as slightly hovering after blinking, even if you go straight to the ground. So if you can't plunging attack afterwards, you'll have a few seconds of awkward in-lag where you can't actually do anything. This can also be combined with the previous lightning infusion timer overlap mechanic for the same result, but with greater damage efficiency against groups of enemies, especially if they're grouped by Venti or Sucrose ults. Finding these kinds of uses for her skill, setting up blink points to reposition in combat as you need, and more is where a lot of the mechanical learning curve with Keqing lies, and what makes her such a fun technical character. And now let's take a look at what sorts of team comps Keqing finds most beneficial. Electro main DPS characters are generally considered weaker than some other options due to their lack of the melt or vaporize reactions and a somewhat lackluster elemental resonance. But Electro is also an element that is decently effective against multiple types of shields, especially Hydro, and while not as strong as melt or vaporize, Electro-based reactions can still be very powerful and often provide some utility aside from just the raw damage. Additionally, mitigation supports as opposed to healers can be more viable with Keqing if you're running the Black Sword on her her thanks to its small amount of self-sustain, but only if you're very confident in your abilities. When team building with a main DPS, you should build your teams around them rather than fitting them into a team, so that you can have a team to fully support and maximize their effectiveness, and there's a few cores that I would suggest playing around with for your Keqing. One of her best cores is a Keqing Jingqiu core, which actually works really well for the mitigation strategy thanks to his range sword mitigation and minor healing. His ult also lets you proc constant electro charge reactions on enemies, especially if you're going the electro build, allowing for more AoE damage that Keqing would otherwise be lacking. And on top of all that, this gives the versatility to deal with enemies and shields of any element aside from electro. I like to pair this with options that help with grouping enemies and improving elemental reaction capabilities for massive bursts of damage, such as with Venti and Albedo or Sucrose and Fischl if you don't have those characters. Another strong core that works for both physical and electro builds if you have the characters is a Geo core using Zhongli and Albedo, with Noelle as a good filler if you don't have one of those characters. After the 1.3 buffs, Geo is a very strong elemental resonance, and Zhongli and Albedo are a fantastic duo that serve well as a core for other teams in and of themselves. Zhongli provides a massive shield and shred for all resistances on top of fantastic damage and CC on his ult, and Albedo provides great utility and damage as a support or sub DPS with his E skill and ult as well. And then just fill the last slot with a flex healer or support option as needed for a versatile comp you can take most anywhere. If you're running a physical build, I'd highly suggest you build a super conduct core using a cryo support or sub DPS character, such as Ganyu, Kaya, Chi-Chi, or Diona to shred through physical resistances. Then pick additional characters that can support you, such as Bennett for his strong heals and massive attack buff, or Jinyan for her shield and physical damage buff while that shield is active. Just don't run them if you plan to run the cryo resonance, as their pyro will melt the cryo element off of enemies. Fischl also works well here to keep super conduct active, and Keqing's great attack speed can also make great use of her C6 if you happen to have it. But any similarly strong and versatile supports can also fit the build that you're looking for. And that's Keqing. While she doesn't easily put out quite as much damage as Diluc or Tartaglia, for example, her damage is still fantastic and her skill ceiling is massive. She is without a doubt my favorite character in the game to play as. With an extremely satisfying mechanical kit, she hits her gameplay mark perfectly. The more you play her, the better you get, and the more damage you can learn to output with her. If you're looking for a main DPS that rewards you for putting in the time to learn and constantly get better with them by learning to make optimal use of their gameplay mechanics, then Keqing is the main DPS for you. Thanks so much for watching the video all the way through. Let me know who you'd like to hear me talk about next in the comments below, and have a great rest of your day.